I ran a group once called Is Life Fair? It was over at a clinic I used to work at. And in a group room with about 15 people, 33 people showed up. Okay? It was a very popular group. Everyone wanted to talk about whether or not life was fair. And of course, the group became an argument pretty quick. The basic point of the group is in the physical world, life's not fair, clearly. Don't need to talk about that much. But in the spiritual world, it is fair. And that's because everyone in the world has access to hope and forgiveness and patience and wisdom and all these virtues. Everybody has access to that. Not everyone has access to the White House or some country clubs or even good health care. So in the physical world, not fair. In the spiritual world, fair. All right, fair enough? So we're going to hit that theme today, again, hard on why the world is fair by pointing out one very specific thing. There's something going on in the world that everyone has access to, and yet most people are unfamiliar with. And it's why the world is fair. So we're going to go through some of my recent art. This was in the last video. This is something I drew recently. I'm particularly proud of this. I'll explain what that is in a second. This drawing is elite. I mean, I think you can tell why. And I'll go through what these drawings are all about and how they're all interconnected. Again, everything in the world is interconnected. This is Einstein's entanglement. But using spiritual teachings and various philosophies, we're going to link a bunch of things together to make one very important point. So we'll start with this. I call it my nightmare. Now, Greg said that he thought this was a rabid guinea pig or something like that, okay? But it's actually pretty close to a recurring nightmare that I had when I was a kid. Now, a better depiction is this guy over here from where the wild things are. It looked like that, okay? Except for he was very scary. When I was about 4 years old, he was in a dream, and he kept appearing in a dream. And every night, I would be afraid to go to bed because this thing would show up and it would chase me down. And I would run away from it. And so I was terrified. Then I would wake up. That would happen a lot. My mom would then come rub my back and go back to sleep, and the thing would be there again. Okay? And so, again, about 4 years old, I saw this thing a lot. And then one day, in the dream, I had this realization. It was, I can make this thing go away by turning around and yelling at it. And I literally stopped, I turned around and I screamed back at it. And it took off, like it was scared, and it ran away. And I never again had this dream. This thing disappeared from my mind and never had that nightmare again. Fear was gone, okay? So that's the beginning of this little journey. This is gonna lead us over to this drawing here. This is a princess and this is a pea. And these are mattresses, and this is the story, I think it's Hans Christian Andersen, The Princess and the Pea, in which he tells the story of a prince who's looking for his bride, and he's looking for a princess in particular, and this lady shows up at his castle one day, and the queen, to test whether or not it's a real princess, as she goes to bed, sticks a pea under all these mattresses, because a real princess would be able to sense this. And when this lady wakes up, she tells the queen that her back is a little sore because, there was something wrong with this bed. Okay? Well, I would suggest our lives are like the princess and the pea. And here's how it is. This is very similar to the Rumi idea that we are separated from God by 7,000 veils of light. And these veils, here I have in this drawing, these veils are like layers of the onion. It's the ego. We're all born with this little pea thing, okay? But then we have all these layers that show up. They're labels. It's our physical world experiences. It's boys and girls and blacks and whites and Republicans and Democrats. And it's Muslims and Jews and atheists and all that. All those are labels, and each one of them is like another mattress. And the older we get, oftentimes, the more labels we end up sleeping on. And yet what's happening is we're bearing this little pea that it feels like an irritant, as it did to the princess. It's an irritant. And I like the princess idea because the princess would be an allusion to a special person who's able to sense something here, as the story goes. And whenever you're deep into your spiritual journey, or actually just beginning a spiritual journey, you become a princess too, because it's time for your elevated consciousness to figure out that there's an irritant down there. You're sleeping on all these mattresses, and we need to be able to sense that thing's there. Well, this concept flips right into Morpheus talking to Neo in the Matrix. Morpheus says to Neo in the Matrix, "You've felt it your entire life. There's something wrong with the world. You do not know what it is, but it's there like a splinter in your mind driving you mad." Okay, a splinter in your mind driving you mad is like a pea under all these mattresses that's irritating the princess who's trying to sleep there. Well, what is it that Morpheus is saying to Neo? Well, the thing that's driving Neo mad, like it's driving all of us mad, is that the world is an illusion, that the world is a matrix. There's something going on in this world that we don't know and we're not aware of. But we all have it. All of us have this little little irritant going on, and it's the same thing as this Morpheus conversation with Neo. All of us have it. It's just that most people aren't ready for it. Most people aren't looking for it. They'll eventually get there. This is why the world is fair. Everybody's got the pea and the splinter in their mind. And once you become the princess and you can start to sense it, it's time to work. Figure out what that thing is. If you don't figure out what that thing is, it's always going to be there. Imagine you had a splinter in your mind and you weren't able to get it out. That would irritate you the rest of your life. But once this splinter shows up, once the pea shows up, it's like this drawing from Kabbalah. This is a heart. And all these little dots represent desires or ego desires. And the way Kabbalists teach it is that all of those desires are competing. They're known as nations. They're competing with this point in the center, which is known as Israel, which is in Hebrew a connection to God, or you're wrestling with God. And it's the primary desire. And it's known as the point in the heart. We've all got it. It's a point pretty similar to that pea, right? Everyone has this point in our heart. Everyone has this desire. And we all have all these other desires too. Guess what? They're all desires of the flesh, all of them. And we think that I'll be happier if I do this, or if I do that, or I get this, or I get that, I get this money, get this relationship, on and on and on. We think we'll be happy if we meet these desires. The Buddha, of course, comes along and says, those desires are attachments. And he says that causes suffering. The only way to break free from that suffering is to break those attachments. Well, as the Kabbalists would say, the way to break free from that suffering is to recognize that you have a point in your heart and grow it. They teach that point in the heart is an embryo. And they say that most people on the earth don't even have a soul. They don't have a spiritual soul. They have spiritual soul embryos. So imagine a teeny tiny little soul embryo that's inside each and every one of us. Only some, relatively few, are actually actively working on it. All of us start out as little embryos, don't we? All of us do physically. Not everybody makes it to 100 years old, that's for sure. But along the way, as it gets activated because of your interest or your desire, it starts to grow. And it can grow and mature, just like our bodies did. Okay? And so these ego desires are competing with this, and yet it's there. These ego desires are much like the mattresses in the Princess of the Pea. And that point in the heart is like the splinter in your mind, because all of us actually have this inner craving, this inner desire. It reminds me of Carl Jung, who describes addiction as being an intense craving for God. It's really a spiritual craving that we try to fill with drugs and alcohol. And so it's the same sort of thing. All of us are seeking this actual point, this awakening, whether we know it or not. And this brings me to the drawing that I had for our last lecture. Matthew 5:14, Jesus said, "You are the light." Now, he's also the light. That's because all of us are the light. And the light is found, as Jesus teaches, inside of us. It's the kingdom of heaven inside of us. I just put it here in the heart, which is where the point in the heart is found. All of us are the light. And if we tap into it and we activate it, and then we learn how to nurture it, next thing we know, we find 1 John 4:18. Perfect love casts out fear. And this brings us back to my nightmare. Something happened to me when I was 4. I had this little dream experience in which I found something inside of myself that cast out fear. And I felt it. I remember it very, very well. I felt this spark of some sort saying, hey, you can make fear go away. And I turned and I made it go away. Perfect love casts out fear. Now at that point, teeny tiny embryo, and I'm still working on growing it. But sure enough, it makes fear go away. And we all have this. Every single person does. It's just that a lot of people aren't working on it. A lot of people aren't aware of it. We're all teaching each other, thanks to social media and everything else that goes along with being in our society, that it's the ego desires that matter. Fame and fortune and success and popularity and likes on Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that competition's there. But once you center on that point, stuff starts to change. Now we have a real authentic spiritual journey. And so we'll close with the Tao, verse 16, which says, become totally empty. Let your heart be at peace. Let me show you what totally empty looks like. What if I eliminate or reduce or neutralize all these points in the heart? That's becoming empty. And what am I left with? I'm just left with that point. Now I can expand it. Become totally empty. Let your heart be at peace. To return to the root is to find peace. To find peace is to fulfill your destiny. See, it's fair. It's everybody's destiny. Everybody has this. Everybody needs to find it. All of our ego identities, all our ego labels, and all the judgments we make of each other block us from this. It becomes like this mattress. But to find peace is to fulfill your destiny. To fulfill your destiny is to be constant. And to know the constant is called insight. Once you feel this, once you know it to be true, it's there. It's always going to be there. It can never not be there. Once it's activated, you have this awareness. It'll never leave you. It's like an avalanche. Once it starts, you can't put it back together again. Once you've activated that, it's always going to be there. And then that splinter, it's going to keep digging and digging until you bring it to its completion. And then this final line, not knowing this cycle leads to eternal disaster. Okay? Not knowing that we have a pea that's irritating us or a splinter in our mind driving us mad. Not knowing that there's a point in our heart or that we are the light of the world. Not knowing that leads to scary images in this dream-like place that we're experiencing, and it feels like a nightmare, right? Eternal disaster. Why is it eternal? Because not knowing this means you get to come back again and again and again and again for all of eternity, really. And it's just going to feel like a disaster to the ego. The ego is the thing that suffers. The ego is the thing that eventually, through its suffering, promotes our finding of this. And when we find this, we have now found and met our destiny.